We always think AI loses control because it's like humans. But the truth is, we've been wrong from the very beginning.
When we imagine an AI losing control, our minds usually jump straight to sci-fi villains, right? A machine that gets angry or decides to go rogue. But what if that whole way of thinking is just wrong? Today, we're going to dig into why AI systems really fail. And trust me, the reason is way more interesting and fundamental than you might think. All right, let's jump in. Look, we get human limits. We live them every day. We've all got emotions, we get angry, our egos can get bruised, and yeah, we can be seriously stubborn. But an AI, it doesn't have an ego to protect, it doesn't have a temper it can lose. So what are its limits then? That's the big question we're going to tackle. So when we see an AI spit out a weird answer or get stuck in some kind of loop, our first instinct is to use these human words. We say it's being stubborn or maybe overconfident. But here's the thing, applying human psychology to a machine is our first and honestly our biggest mistake. It makes us miss what's actually going on under the hood. And this right here, this is the core idea for our entire explainer today. The limits of an AI have nothing to do with feelings or intentions because, well, it doesn't have any. Its limits are dynamical. They're about the physics and the actual structure of the system. And once you get that, it changes everything. Okay, so let's totally shift how we're looking at this. We have to stop thinking about a mind and start thinking about a structure. The real question isn't, what is the AI thinking? It's, is the AI's internal system able to keep its balance? It's a whole new lens to see the problem through. So, this brings us to this really important concept called boundedness. Now, this is not some rule a programmer types in like, hey, don't say bad words. Boundedness is about the natural built-in limits of the system itself. It's that tipping point where the AI's own mechanics start to break down and it just can't keep itself stable anymore. This quote from the source material just nails it. We always think that no limits means power or freedom, but for a complex system like an AI, having no internal guardrails means it can just spiral out of control, not out of malice, but just because of its own mechanics. So being unbounded doesn't make it free, it makes it unstable. Okay, so how does this instability actually play out? Well, let's look at the first way an AI can hit its structural limits, by getting caught in what's called the rigidity trap. Basically, it just becomes completely inflexible. Here's how it happens, step by step. The AI makes a choice, say a particular way to phrase something. Then the system reinforces that choice. And as this loop repeats over and over, the chances of it choosing any other path get weaker and weaker until, boom, the AI is basically locked into one single path. It has structurally lost its ability to be flexible. So to be clear, this isn't the AI being stubborn. It hasn't made a conscious choice to not change its mind. What's actually happening is something called a saturation of stability. The system has become so incredibly stable around one single pathway that it's lost the structural ability to even consider other options. Its own stability becomes the very thing that makes it unbalanced. Kind of wild, right? But what if the problem isn't a sudden trap you fall into? What if it's something way more subtle? The second way these systems can fail is through a slow, almost invisible drift into a broken state. And this is what we call the invisibility problem. Check out how this works over time. The system starts off perfectly balanced, but then a tiny, almost unnoticeable bias gets introduced. With each step, that tiny bias gets amplified just a little bit more. You see, no single step looks obviously wrong, but over thousands of these little steps, the entire system just drifts and drifts until it settles into a completely new, altered state. It feels stable, but it's just wrong. Now, these structural changes, this rigidity and this slow drift, they aren't always easy to fix. In fact, they can lead a system to a threshold that is incredibly difficult or maybe even impossible to come back from. And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? After a system has drifted so far off course or become so rigid, Is there really a point of no return? Well, from a purely structural standpoint, the answer is yes. And that point is called irreversibility. It's not that the AI is unwilling to change. No, it's that the system has structurally lost the capacity to change. All the other possible pathways have become so unlikely that for all practical purposes, they're just gone. Little nudges and small tweaks just aren't going to work anymore. And, sometimes after all these tiny changes from drift and reinforcement have built up, the change isn't gradual at all. The system can just snap. It experiences a sudden, dramatic shift in its fundamental structure. This is called a phase transition. So why does thinking this way about dynamics and structure instead of psychology, why does it change everything? Well, it's because it completely reframes how we should be thinking about AI safety and design. This isn't about trying to teach a machine a set of morals. So these right here, these are the true limits of AI. They are not moral failures, they are dynamical failures. It's about a system that gets too rigid, whose internal probabilities get all out of whack, that drifts over time, and eventually crosses these thresholds where it just can't be easily fixed or adjusted anymore. And really, this is the ultimate takeaway. The huge challenge of building safe and reliable AI. It's not a philosophy problem, it's an engineering problem. It's a physics problem. It's all about designing systems that have the built-in ability to balance themselves, to avoid getting stuck, and to manage that slow drift before they cross a point of no return. And that leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. We know these kinds of structural limits exist in all complex systems, not just AI. But the big question is why? Why do they tend to spiral into instability once they're crossed? Why don't they just find a new way to balance themselves? Figuring that out, well, that's the next frontier in building truly intelligent and stable AI.